Hi there, I am Lorrie Rivers, and I'm the creator of the Long COVID and MECFS Holistic Healing Summit and of the Relief and Transformation course for recovering from Long COVID and MECFS. And I'm really excited to be bringing you my Holistic Healing with Lorrie podcast because I know personally how difficult it is to have these kinds of illnesses. So, we're going to be exploring some of the things that I have used myself and with my clients and students over the past 20 plus years for MECFS, and that's myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, which you probably know if you have it, and for fibromyalgia as well. And that I also use now for my clients and students with long COVID, and that I used for myself to recover from long COVID. We're also going to be exploring any new approaches and findings that I run across in expert interviews with doctors, coaches, and more. And I do a lot of interviews with doctors and coaches and other people, other experts for the summit. You get to hear the cutting edge stuff that's out there right now that's helping people. And then also, of course, if you run across any topics or experts or new approaches that you'd like to know more about, please do let me know in comments, or you can contact me and I'll do an interview around that. I also know how helpful it is to be able to watch recovery stories. We want to know that other people are getting well. We want to know that it's possible for other people, because then that means that it's possible for us as well and what they did. So we're going to be sprinkling those in here and there as well. Now, I mentioned before that I know how difficult this journey is. And the reason that I know how difficult it is, whether you've had MECFS for decades or if you've had long COVID for several years, the reason that I know is because, just like you, I have my own experiences with them. And I do find that the people who are the most helpful, they have had their own experiences with them as well. So I myself had severe MECFS for 8 years when I was in my 20s. And as I was recovering from that in the last few years, I started to have other people with MECFS to actually seek me out for coaching. During that time, I became an EFT, emotional freedom technique coach. That's tapping. And I just started to find that more and more people with MECFS were coming to me and asking me how I recovered and if I could help them with that. So in addition to the EFT, I started to teach them about nutrition, about pacing, things like that. So I've now been successfully coaching people with MECFS and fibromyalgia, we'll get to that, for over 20 years. And then the pandemic hit, and I actually ended up developing long COVID very early on in the pandemic. And I realized very quickly, probably within about 2 months of having having COVID itself, I realized how similar what I was experiencing at that point was to the MECFS that I'd had so many years before that. And it was basically the same what I started to experience after having COVID, but just with slightly different flavors. And because of that, I knew that I needed to approach it like it was MECFS. So I knew to do my pacing. I knew to really hone in on my nutrition and my eating plan. And I even switched it around a lot as well. So I was able to fully recover from long COVID in under 8 months. Now, I really want for you to understand that if you have had long COVID or any CFS for more than 8 months or for decades or whatever, and you're doing your pacing and you're eating right and all that good stuff, that you're not doing it wrong. You're not deficient in any way. I'm not by any means saying that I'm better than you or that anything like that. I just happened to have figured out certain things to do and not to do. And also, everybody's body is different. So I understand that you could be doing everything right, but still just not quite fully recovering. Now, that's what we go through in the Relief and Transformation course that I offer, actually, is we tailor it to you specifically. And some people, it's going to take longer and it's going to possibly need stronger interventions. And that course, the Relief and Transformation course, and I'm talking about that because that's really the top of the line of what I offer people to help them to fully recover. And it's really evolved into what it is now because of requests from clients over all the years. to have all those strategies and approaches that I teach for holistic healing of these illnesses in one place and easily accessible. But then it's also because a few years ago, I made a discovery for me that totally changed my own life health wise. And subsequently, that opened my eyes to what the root cause of all of these strange chronic illnesses is and how to treat it. So I think I may have mentioned earlier that I also had fibromyalgia. So in addition to the long COVID and the severe ECFS, I'd had what I ended up calling weather dependent fibromyalgia my whole life. And that may not seem like a big deal, but it meant basically that I'd have days or weeks when I experienced what I call my Wonder Woman days, where I had a ton of energy. I had fun at school. I was outgoing. I was excited about life and about all my activities. I was on fire. I was president of tons of clubs. I was top in my class. I got into a really good, difficult to get into college and all these things. And on those Wonder Woman days, I had a ton of physical energy as well, like extraordinary. And then on other days or weeks or sometimes months, I couldn't get out of bed. I was in a lot of pain, despondent, anxious. I couldn't think, had brain fog, couldn't remember things. My muscles were weak and painful. And I just wanted to hide in a cave. And I was miserable physically, emotionally, cognitively. And I missed a lot of school growing up because of that. And of course, I ended up going to tons of doctors. I was in hospitals for months at a time, sometimes when I was growing up, because they were trying to figure out what was causing all of these crazy symptoms and what was keeping me from being able to be the way that I was in my normal lives. And of course, they couldn't figure out really anything. So I ended up going to psychiatrists and taking medications, some of which even ended up making me feel suicidal, which I'm not. And for those of you who have tried different types of anti-anxiety and antidepressant meds, you may have had a similar kind of response. And so really I think actually one of the doctors, not a psychiatrist, but one of the doctors put me on Synthroid when I was I think I was like 12 years old or something, and other things like that, birth control, thinking that it was hormones and all sorts of things. And it took me about 35 years or so to discover that for some weird reason, it was the weather that determined these very severe shifts in my whole body, in my mind, and my emotions. And the reason I realized that was because I finally lived in Los Angeles for several years. And while I lived there, most of my days were Wonder Woman days. And of course, in Los Angeles, there is very little weather. And so that's why I had all those Wonder Woman days. And then when I moved back to the Southeast in the US, where there is a ton of weather all the time, then I started having more sofa days, more couch days than Wonder Woman days. In fact, the Wonder Woman days were very few and far between. Though sometimes in the summer, I would have a couple of weeks of them. But it was very difficult. But it finally dawned on me when I moved back to the Southeast from Los Angeles, hey, what's different here? It's the weather. It's not that I knew that the place that I'd moved into wasn't moldy or anything. It was all that was clear there. So anyway, the hugely happy ending to the story, not only for me, but also for my students and my clients, is that I did finally discover what the root cause of that formerly lifelong fibromyalgia was. And this is also what is at the root of ME/CFS and long COVID, and that I'd had, and really for any chronic illness for anyone. Of course, there are other things that come into play with long COVID or vaccine injury, spike proteins, but I have something that can help address that as well. I've done some interviews with some doctors about that. But anyway, as far as me addressing my fibromyalgia, I really hunkered down and spent a year plus addressing that root cause. And so now, for the first time in my whole life, even though I'm still living in the Southeast and we have a ton of weather. Today it's 86 degrees outside and sunny. And then this afternoon, we're going to be having thunderstorms. And then there's going to be a cold front coming through. All those things would have used to have just laid me out for days usually. Now that I've addressed the root cause, 98% of my days, I would say, are Wonder Woman days. I'm no longer affected by the weather. I don't consider myself to have fibromyalgia anymore. I'm consistently active. My brain works. I'm happy and I have a positive outlook. So in the podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you more about those root causes of these illnesses, how you can address them, and then those other factors that have helped my clients over the past 20 years and that are now helping my students to fully recover as well. Spike protein stuff, which is very important for people with long COVID and who have experienced any kind of vaccine injuries. Now, I'm going to go ahead and be completely upfront and real with you. Spoiler alert, there's not a magic pill. I really wish there were. But even though the root causes are the same, the approach has to be different for each person. And it really takes a lot of time and dedication, and it's not always easy. And in fact, I'm just going to say it, it absolutely sucks in the beginning for the first many months of treating. But in the end, you get to be healthier than you've ever been before, because typically, well, always, these root cause hidden infections were always there before you end up developing a chronic illness. So that's how you end up being healthier than you've ever been before. And I hope, and this is what I've experienced and what so many of my students have experienced and so many other people who have recovered from these illnesses, they experience that they're even happier because their priorities are in place now and their perspective on life and their bodies and their health is so much different. There's just an appreciation that you have that somebody who's not experienced something like this just doesn't get. It's like you'll be out and about and watching people walk around or watching people do yoga or whatever. And you're just like, do you understand how amazing it is that your body is able to do this and to recover from it afterwards? And just the appreciation you feel for every little thing that you can do again, or maybe even for the first time, even just for maybe being able to walk up the stairs without creating post-exertional malaise afterwards. Or if you had POTS, to be able to stand up without worrying that you might faint or that your heart rate just goes crazy. So just fill in the blank there. Those little things and that appreciation that you feel is going to be so beautiful. And you're going to be able to enjoy the preciousness of your life and of your body so much more than anyone who hasn't been through this experience. So welcome to my podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for being here. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you know when new episodes are released with new information. I have new information coming out all the time. And I'm just really looking forward to taking this journey with you.